And what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Historic Hot Laps. I'm your host, Alex Daniels. So coming up this week, we've got one of the wildest motorsports weekends of the year to break down because SVG continues turning NASCAR road courses into his personal playground after another dominant win at Watkins Glen. While IndyCar is facing some serious backlash, especially online, and we know how the Twitter sphere works, after one of the worst officiating decisions we've seen in years at the Indianapolis Grand Prix, we're talking about Alexander Rossi sitting stranded on the front stretch at Indy while race control somehow kept the race green with a local yellow, and now IndyCar is already changing the rules because of the fallout. We'll talk about that. Meanwhile, sprint car racing absolutely stole the show this last weekend. Kasey Kahne finally accomplished one thing that's eluded him for nearly 3 decades, and that's a World of Outlaws victory, before David Gravel reminded everybody why he's still a benchmark at sprint car racing less than 24 hours later. Then over at Kokomo, Aaron Reitzel survived absolute chaos in the High Limit Series at one of the nastiest bull rings in America. We got Formula One news to cover, including Red Bull reportedly eyeing Oscar Piastri as a possible future replacement. Plus, the FIA quietly reshaping the future financial landscape of Formula One with major development regulation change ahead of 2026. And in this week's history segment, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating organizations in American open wheel history, and that's Rahal Hogan Racing. From Bobby Rahal's owner-driver championship years to failed Indy 500 qualifying drama to the roots of what would eventually become RLL. This is one of the coolest stories of the kart era, plus Katherine Legge attempting the double. So many things to talk about. Buckle up. This is Historic Hot Laps. Let's go. All right, the month of May has officially kicked off the IndyCar Series with the 2026 Sancio Grand Prix at, of course, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the road course. And honestly, this race had a little bit of everything. You had strategy shakeups, you had aggressive passes, cautions everywhere, an absolutely embarrassing moment for race control. At the end, the winner, Christian Lundgaard, and as this was a huge statement victory for both him and Arrow McLaren, Lundgaard snapped a 47-race winless streak after making what was probably the move of the race, an outside pass on David Malukas with 18 laps to go. Once he cleared him, he absolutely disappeared and won by more than 4 seconds. The race itself was chaotic early. You had multiple cautions, completely scrambled strategies, including an opening lap incident involving Pato O'Ward and Felix Rosenqvist that sent cars scattering and shuffled the order immediately. Alex Palou looked like a dominant car for the huge portion of the weekend after taking pole, controlling the early stages. The strategy during yellow trapped him and knocked him out of contention for the win. He still recovered to 5th, which honestly says a lot about how fast the Ganassi car really was. Behind Lundgaard, you had Malukas finishing 2nd after another really strong run. I mean, he is knocking on the door of a win. We all know it. Wow, behind him, you had Graham Rahal grabbing 3rd for another solid podium. Graham is so good at the Indy GP. I'm just going to say that out there. Joseph Newgarden came home 4th, and Palou rounded out the top 5. But the thing everyone is going to remember from this race is completely ridiculous handling of the Alexander Rossi situation. Rossi's car died on the front straight after another hybrid system issue, and IndyCar Race Control somehow decided a local yellow was enough while cars blasted past him at roughly 170 miles an hour. Not behind a wall, not tucked into a runoff area, directly on the front stretch. A car width in between the cars racing on track, and Alexander Rossi is a sitting duck. And that's at Indianapolis. And the worst part is everybody's watching immediately assumed a full course caution would have been coming because that's the only sane decision of this situation, right? Even the broadcast appeared confused and somewhat upset. Meanwhile, Rossi is sitting there stranded in a dead car while the field keeps racing around him. Then somehow it still gets even worse. Race control still waited until Rossi physically climbed out of the car and started moving towards the pit lane before finally throwing a full course yellow. And that's super unacceptable. Full stop, sitting on the front stretch. I mean, come on. This wasn't a judgment call that looked bad. In hindsight, this was absolutely dangerous. In real time, every single person watching could see it. Rossi himself called it insane, and honestly, he was being rather polite in his interviews. IndyCar cannot spend years preaching safety, postpone qualifying because of standing water the day before, and then suddenly decide stranded driver on the front stretch at Indianapolis doesn't warrant an immediate caution. I mean, that's hypocrisy if you've ever defined it, right? The inconsistency is staggering. And if we're going to be brutally honest here, it looked like race control was trying to protect pit strategy, and then coming out after the fact, that's exactly what they were doing. They're trying to avoid trapping drivers and closing the pits ahead of prioritizing driver safety. And that's a terrible look for the series. Rossi had every right to be furious, and frankly, IndyCar owes the entire paddock an explanation for how that was allowed to happen. And yes, things have come out after the race a little bit, or a few days post-race, right? So They officially changed full course caution procedures following the backlash. And to give a little history on this, they want to protect pit strategies because of teams that have complained in the past of how races are ruined over, pit stop strategies. But that's part of the gamble. It's part of racing, honestly. But they have changed the procedures following the backlash from the Rossi stranded car incident. And honestly, this move tells you everything you need to know about how badly race control mishandled that situation. After Rossi's car was stopped on the front stretch and sat exposed, criticism from drivers, teams, media, fans, everything. Rossi himself said uncomfortable and ridiculous in his interview, and many drivers openly questioned how race control could justify delaying a full course caution, right? So the immediate procedural change is, according to the new policy, race control will no longer consider pit windows or the running order before deploying a full course yellow. Instead, caution decisions will now prioritize driver safety, vehicle condition, location on track, safety worker access, and speed differential between approaching cars and a disabled vehicle. And let's be honest here, I understand why they made the call they made to maybe delay it a little bit, but he was in no protected situation whatsoever. Had he been in a weird runoff or say, the back part of the chicane, if he was able to get the car back there, whatever, but he wasn't. Front stretch to front stretch, cars right next to him. I mean, it should have been done. Going back to the changes they're making, the wording is basically IndyCar admitting the old process played too heavily into strategy considerations, because during the Grand Prix, it absolutely looked like officials hesitated throwing the yellow to avoid trapping drivers in unfavorable pit cycles. The problem is they did that while Rossi was sitting stranded on the fastest section of the track. So this is why it became such a huge issue, right? Like we just mentioned, this wasn't a judgment call people debated days later. Everybody watching in real time immediately knew a full course caution should have been thrown. Even drivers in the race were confused why the green stayed out as long as it did. So while IndyCar deserves credit for reacting quickly and changing the policy before the Indy 500, the bigger question now becomes consistency, because the month of May is where officiating mistakes get magnified more than anywhere else in motorsports. One bad call at the Indy 500 can define an entire season, an entire career. After the backlash from the GP weekend, all eyes are now going to be on the IndyCar race control for the rest of May. And let's hope that they've made some improvements and things go smoothly from here on out, right? That's all we can hope as race fans, that this will improve it. Sucks for Rossi, sucks for the situation. Super unfortunate, but let's move forward with the new rule and see what happens. All right, NASCAR at the Glen. NASCAR weekend at Watkins Glen absolutely delivered across all three national series. And honestly, this one felt like one of those classic road course weekends where strategy, aggression, and survival all kind of mattered equally. At the end of Sunday, the biggest story in NASCAR once again became SVG, reminding everybody that when it comes to road racing, the rest of the field is still just going to chase him. Starting with the Truck Series on Friday, Watkins Glen immediately turned chaotic in typical Truck Series fashion, one of my favorite races to watch. The race featured multiple strategy swings, aggressive braking zone moves, plenty of drivers abusing the curves trying to gain every inch possible around the Glen. Caden Honeycutt continued his strong 2026 campaign with another solid points day, while several playoff hopefuls found themselves fighting just to survive the race instead of racing for the win. Road courses in the Truck Series always create this weird balance where you're getting experienced road racers mixed with guys still learning how to survive heavy braking zones, and you've got the left foot braking or not to left foot brake in a truck, and that frankly doesn't always want to turn for you. And that combination led to several late race incidents and restart chaos through the event. But Caden Honeycutt gets it done. Then on Saturday, the O'Reilly Series gave us one of the brightest young stars in the sport, continuing to build his reputation. Connor Zilisch picked up the victory in the Mission 200. And honestly, the scary part is how natural road racing already looks for him at such a young age. We've talked about his sports car stuff. I mean, he's a Daytona winner, right? The kid is insane on the road courses. So he's fast basically the entire weekend. He qualified near the front, controlled long portions of the race, all the normal stuff. Looked incredibly composed through the high-speed sections. I mean, Watkins Glen rewards precision more than almost any other NASCAR track. And Zilisch looked like a veteran attacking the bus stop and the S's just fine. And what makes it even more interesting is that SVG was also in the field, meaning Zilisch wasn't just beating regular Xfinity competition, or should I say O'Reilly competition. He was beating some of the best road racers in the world, and that's a huge statement. The O'Reilly Series race also featured several strategy gambles as teams tried to maximize stage points and sacrifice overall track position. Watkins Glen once again showed how brutal pit road mistakes can become on a road course. One bad stop or one missed braking point can completely destroy a race instantly. But then came Sunday's Cup Series race, and honestly, it turned into another SVG masterclass, right? We've talked about it. SGV won the Go Bowling at the Glen in absolute dominant fashion. And the craziest part is that his final margin of victory almost undersells how ridiculous his drive actually was. Late in the race, SVG found himself nearly 30 seconds behind Ty Gibbs after a pit strategy cycled out. Normally at Watkins Glen, once a driver gets clear air and late in the race, it's really difficult to close that kind of gap. SVG erased it in less than 20 laps. It's absolutely insane. 30-second deficit gone in 20 laps. Lap after lap, he's absolutely carving through the field, braking impossibly deep into corners and using curbs the way most NASCAR drivers simply can't replicate. And we're going back to his days in Australia supercars, right? By the closing laps, Ty Gibbs honestly looked hopeless trying to defend the lead because SVG's pace advantage was so overwhelming. Once SVG got around Gibbs with 8 laps remaining, the race was effectively over. He drove away to the win by more than 7 seconds over Michael McDowell. And this is becoming a series trend now. SG has won 6 of the last 7 NASCAR road course races and now owns 7 career Cup Series victories despite only around 60 starts at the Cup level. Every single one of those wins has come on a road course. At this point, the conversation has honestly shifted from is SVG a road course threat to is SVG already the greatest road course racer NASCAR has ever seen? Because statistically and visually, we're watching something fairly historic here. Behind him, Michael McDowell finished second after an excellent road course performance, while Ty Gibbs settled for third, leading late but simply not having enough pace to hold off SVG's charge. Chase Briscoe and Tyler Reddick rounded out the top 5. The race also had plenty of drama outside the battle for the win. Connor Zilch looked like he might contend for both the O'Reilly and Cup races during this weekend, but his Sunday effort unraveled after a late tire issue dropped him deep in the field. Meanwhile, Bubba Wallace and Christopher Bell had a heated confrontation on pit road after contact and frustration boiled over post-race. And after Watkins Glen, the Cup Series points picture is starting to become much more clear. Tyler Reddick still remains the points leader and actually extended his advantage after another strong top 5 run. He now leads Denny Hamlin by 129 points, which is crazy to say, with Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, and Chris Buescher competing in the top 5 of the standings. The cutoff line is where things really get interesting. Right now, SVG sits at 16th, the final transfer position under the current Chase format, after gaining 3 spots with his Watkins Glen victory. Chase Briscoe is currently on the outside looking in, followed closely by Joey Logano and Ross Chastain. And honestly, Watkins Glen may end up being one of the defining races of the regular season because SVG's win completely reshuffled the bottom half of the playoff grid. The road course portion of the schedule is now officially becoming must-watch chaos for anybody near the cut line. All right, let's move over to the dirt world of things because the World of Outlaws weekend at Williams Grove Speedway honestly felt like a perfect example of why sprint car racing is unmatched when it comes to storytelling. Night 1 gave us one of the most emotional and unexpected victories the sport has seen in many years. Night 2 reminded everyone exactly why David Gravel is still the standard in World of Outlaws championships. So Friday night belonged to Kasey Kahne. What made this so incredible is that Kahne already had one of the most successful racing careers imaginable before this even happened, right? He won crown jewels in NASCAR, built Kasey Kahne Racing into a powerhouse sprint car organization, watched drivers like Brad Sweet and Darren Pittman win 6 World of Outlaws championships inside his equipment, but somehow through all of that, Kahne himself never won a World of Outlaws feature. Coming into Friday night's Morgan Cup opener at Williams Grove, Kahne had made 227 career starts with the greatest show on dirt, dating all the way back to 1997. His best finishes were only a pair of third-place runs. Then everything changed. Driving the Macri Motorsports car while Anthony Macri recovers from injury, Kahne looked fast from the moment the night started. He won the heat race, won the dash, then had to survive an absolute war in the feature event. Early on, David Gravel threw a challenge at him, trying to still control the race before Kahne settled into a rhythm. Then late in the race, Sheldon Hodenschild started hunting him down in traffic, throwing sliders and searching for every inch of racetrack, trying to force Kahne into a mistake. But Kahne never cracked. He stayed smooth, he managed traffic perfectly, and finally crossed the line to score his first career World of Outlaws victory nearly 28 years after making his debut with the series. And honestly, hearing the emotion afterward made the moment even better because Kahne sounded genuinely stunned that it finally happened. "This is crazy," he said afterward. "I couldn't believe this would happen on this weekend. That right there is what dirt racing is all about. This wasn't some publicity appearance." Kahne said just a couple weeks ago he was still in the shop building his own sprint car, hoping to race later in the season. Then suddenly he's standing in Williams Grove victory lane after beating the best sprint car drivers in the world. The win carried a really cool full circle story with crew chief Joe Mooney, who used to work for Kasey Kahne Racing, Mooney credited Kahne for helping shape his career, and now he gets to help Kahne finally accomplish one of the most important victories that he's ever had in sprint car racing, right? I mean, Kahne became 156 different World of Outlaws winner and only the third driver from Washington State to ever accomplish it. So, super great, emotional, awesome. But then Saturday night comes. David Gravel reminded everyone why he's chasing a third straight World of Outlaws championship. Gravel absolutely ripped the Morgan Cup away from the Pennsylvania posse with a dominant performance in the finale. Starting on the outside of the front row next to Kahne, Gravel made what was probably the winning move immediately. He launched around Kahne on the opening lap using the high side, and he never looked back. Once Gravel got out front, the Big Game Motorsports number 2 looked untouchable. The car was incredible in traffic, especially through the middle portion of the race, where Gravel was slicing through lap cars without losing momentum. Williams Grove got fast and technical, but Gravel was just operating under another level. Justin Whittall actually mounted a late charge and started reeling Gravel in during the closing laps, but there simply wasn't enough time. Gravel took the checkered flag, secured the Morgan Cup for the Outlaws, and collected another $20,000 payday. What's crazy is Gravel said after the race that his engine actually wasn't fully up to temperature during the opening laps, but he still had enough speed to clear Kahne immediately and take command of the race. That win marked Gravel's 125th career World of Outlaws victory and his 10th at Williams Grove Speedway, putting him in some unbelievably elite company. Only legends like Steve Kinzer, Donnie Schatz, Mark Kinzer, Lance DeWeese, and Sammy Swindell have hit double-digit Outlaw wins there. That's not just impressive company, that's royalty, in my opinion. Behind Gravel, Justin Whittall scored the best World of Outlaws finish of his career in second, while Troy Wagerman Jr. completed the podium with another career best result. So, even though the posse lost the Morgan Cup battle, Pennsylvania delivers still incredible speed all weekend long. They get the podium. And honestly, this whole weekend was a perfect snapshot of sprint car racing as a whole. Friday night gave us an emotional feel-good victory with Kasey Kahne finally breaking through after 3 decades of trying. And then Saturday night gave us a cold reality of what the current World of Outlaws landscape looks like, and that's David Gravel up front. They're still the team everybody has to be if they want a championship in 2026. This moves us to the High Limit Series. They delivered another barn burner this weekend at Kokomo Speedway with the Brian Clausen Hero Classic. And honestly, it felt fitting that the race honoring Brian Clausen turned into a flat-out elbows-up sprint car showcase at one of the wildest racetracks in America. Originally, this was supposed to be a 2-day event, but rain wiped out the first night and condensed everything into one massive Saturday show, paying $20,000 to win, and Kokomo absolutely delivered. From the drop of the green flag, Aaron Reitzel looked like the guy to beat, starting on pole in the Ridge and Sons Racing number 87. Reitzel launched out immediately in the front, basically controlled the race from start to finish, but saying he dominated almost undersells how hard he had to work for this one because Kokomo was unbelievably racy all night long. The opening stages were chaos. The initial start barely lasted before Hank Davis flipped and brought out the red flag on lap 2. Then the restart got wiped out almost instantly after Tanner Holmes and Logan Seavey got together, creating another caution before the field could even settle in. Once the race finally found a rhythm, things got pretty interesting. You had Justin Peck starting to absolutely rip the cushion, quickly moved into second, while Rico and Giovanni joined the fight. For the stretch there, the top 4 cars were all hammering the top side inches of the wall, and honestly, it looked like a video game. That's what makes Kokomo so special. When it's right, this place becomes a half-mile knife fight, where every corner feels like the car's about to launch into orbit, right? I mean, that high line is insane. Russell reached traffic, Peck started closing rapidly, and the Rudy and Racing number 26 looked phenomenal against the fence. And for a moment, it really felt like Peck was setting Russell up for a late race pass. Then Rico entered the picture. Abreu kept throwing sliders at Peck for second place while trying to maintain enough momentum to still chase down Russell. The Tony Stewart Racing number 24 was aggressive all night long. But every time it looked like Peck might lose a spot, he'd fight right back around the top and reclaim it. And while those two were battling, Brady Bacon started charging into the mix too before disaster struck on lap 27. Tyler Courtney hit an implement tire, collected Bacon, ending what had been one of the strongest runs of the night for the Indiana sprint car veteran. It also capped off a brutal evening for Clausen Marshall Racing because Courtney later tangled with Kerry Madsen during another restart sequence. The cautions kept resetting the field, but nobody could fully crack Aaron Reutzel. Even the lap traffic becoming a factor late in the field and bunching everything back up multiple times. Reutzel never really blinked. Every restart, every challenge, every attempt to pressure, he answered every single one of them. And over the final laps, Justin Peck absolutely sent it against the cushion, trying to find one last shot to the lead. And honestly, Peck drove harder than anybody in the field during those closing circuits. The cushion at Kokomo had become unbelievably treacherous, but Peck just kept attacking it anyway, and it wasn't enough though. Aaron Russell held on for his first career Kokomo Speedway win, second consecutive high limit victory after winning the previous weekend at Texas. That's a massive statement for the Ridge and Sons team because Russell suddenly looks like one of the hottest drivers in sprint car racing right now. Peck finished second for the second straight night at Kokomo, continuing what had been an incredibly strong run for the Rudine Racing team, while Rico and Tony Stewart Racing rounded out the podium and continued stacking consistent finishes up against the championship fight. Giovanni came in fourth, and Joel Miles Jr. quietly put together one of the best runs of the night, finishing fifth after starting 13th. Honestly, the biggest takeaway from this race is just how ridiculously competitive high limit has become. You had Russell, Peck, Rico Abreu, Giovanni Chelsea, Brady Bacon, Tyler Courtney, Brent Marks, Parker Price Miller. I mean, legitimate stars everywhere you looked, all trying to survive one of the most intense bull rings in sprint car racing. One of the greatest tracks out there, honestly. The racing product right now between High Limit and the World of Outlaws is unbelievable for sprint car fans because every single weekend it feels like a heavyweight fight. And yeah, I can't wait to see what happens as the season goes on. Right, let's talk about a little bit of news stuff because we got some pretty exciting things here. Katherine Legge will become the first woman ever to attempt racing's legendary double, competing in both the Indy 500 coming up here at the end of the month, a couple weeks away. I'm excited. Car's on track right now practicing. Anyway, the Indianapolis 500 and the NASCAR Coca-Cola 600 on the same day. Honestly, people outside motorsports probably don't fully understand how insane this challenge actually is. The double means racing 500 miles at Indy, immediately flying to Charlotte, and then climbing in a completely different race car for another 600 miles in NASCAR's longest event of the year. That's 1,100 miles in one day. Only 5 drivers in history have ever attempted it. You had John Andretti as the first, Robbie Gordon tried it, Tony Stewart tried it, Kurt Busch tried it, and Kyle Larson the last 2 years tried it, and there's a documentary coming out all about that. Tony Stewart remains the only driver to complete every single lap of both races in the same day back in 2001. Now, Katherine Legge is adding her name to that list. She'll drive the number 11 Chevrolet for HMD Motorsports with AJ Foyt Racing in the Indianapolis 500 before immediately traveling to Charlotte Motor Speedway to drive the number 78 Chevrolet for Live Fast Motorsports in the Coca-Cola 600. Honestly, this is a huge moment for Legge personally because she has quietly built one of the most diverse careers in motorsports. She's raced Indy cars, IMSA prototypes, Formula E, NASCAR, sports cars in Europe, basically everything with 4 wheels. She did some hill climb stuff, and now she's taking on one of the hardest endurance challenges in racing. What's also really interesting is that Legge herself doesn't want to focus to just be about gender milestones. She's repeatedly said she simply wants to be viewed as a race car driver competing at the highest level possible. But the reality is still that this is historically one of the greatest things ever because no woman has ever attempted both races on the same day before. And if she successfully starts both events, she'll officially become part of one of the rarest clubs in all of motorsports. After Kyle Larson's weather issues in 2024 and crashes in 2025, people are being reminded how brutally difficult this challenge really is. It requires speed, endurance, logistics, perfect timing, reliable equipment, and honestly, some luck. Even fans online are already talking about how just finishing both races would be an accomplishment considering how physically demanding the day becomes. And honestly, whether you're an IndyCar fan or a NASCAR fan, this is kind of a crossover story motorsports needs more of because the double still represents something super special to motorsports fans. And it's one of the few remaining challenges in racing that's almost mythical, right? All right, let's jump over to a little Formula One talk. Not a lot to talk about this week, but the FIA has quietly made significant adjustment to the financial and technical landscape heading into the 2026 season from here forward. It directly impacts the cost cap structure and development flexibility for struggling manufacturers. According to reports from motorsports.com and a couple others, the FIA has updated its ADUO system, which is the Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities Framework, which is designed to help underperforming power unit manufacturers close the gap during the new engine cycle. And while this isn't a headline-grabbing cost cap increase in the traditional sense of the word, the reality is that this functions like one in practice because it allows additional development spending and extended testing allowances for manufacturers that are falling behind the curve. One of the biggest beneficiaries of this adjustment is expected to be Honda, which is powering Aston Martin's 2026 project, right? Reports suggest that Honda's current power unit struggles have triggered eligibility for extra development resources under the updated system and rules. The FIA changes specifically alter how the ADUO evaluation windows are structured, shifting review points to account for recent calendar changes, including the cancellation of certain early season events. That matters because those review periods determine how much additional dyno time, development allowance, and financial flexibility a manufacturer receives, essentially acting as a controlled cost cap relief valve for performance deficits, right? So on top of that, the broader F1 financial rules already saw a major jump for 2026, with the cost cap increasing to around $215 million for teams and separate power unit cost cap rising to $130 million under the new regulation cycle. So while the FIA isn't officially raising the cost cap mid-cycle, what they're doing is widening the development allowance system in a way that effectively increases spending flexibility for those select manufacturers that are struggling to keep pace in this new hybrid era. So from a competitive standpoint, this is FIA trying to prevent a repeat of previous regulation cycles where one engine supplier runs away with dominance and the others are left chasing for years. But it also raises a familiar debate in the paddock of how much assistance is too much assistance, right? Because while teams like Aston Martin and Honda will see this as a lifeline for development, rival manufacturers are already questioning whether performance-based spending adjustments blur the line between regulation and advantage in the cost cap. One thing is clear. In 2026, though, the battle isn't just happening on the track anymore, it's happening in the rule books, and we've got to keep a real close eye on how this all plays out. Another piece of Formula One rumor, if you will. The driver market never really sleeps over there, we know that. And this week, a major rumor out of the paddock set off one of the biggest what-if discussions, one of the biggest trolls, if you will. But according to multiple reports from the Miami Grand Prix weekend, Red Bull is internally identifying McLaren star Oscar Piastri as a potential long-term replacement option for Max Verstappen. You know there's handshakes and lunches already happening with this stuff, right? Should the reigning world champion ever leave the team, which Max has said before, he's unhappy, right? So let's be clear, Verstappen is still under contract through 2027, and Red Bull publicly maintains that he remains central to their long-term plans. But behind the scenes, sources suggest the team is at least preparing a contingency in case of the unexpected, right? Including a retirement, sabbatical, or a shock switch to another team, and that's where Oscar Piastri will enter the picture. The McLaren driver has quickly become one of the most highly rated young talents on the grid, with Red Bull reportedly viewing him as Plan B option to their Verstappen era if it ever comes to an end. Internally, Red Bull leadership, including team principal Laurent Mekies and senior management, are believed to be monitoring Piastri very closely, seeing him as a driver capable of immediate results while still having long-term championship upsides. And this isn't just casual interest. Reports suggest that Red Bull has already mapped out multiple scenarios where Piastri becomes a centerpiece of a post-Verstappen lineup, even factoring in how McLaren's contract situation and internal dynamics could potentially open the door in the future. I mean, we know F1's full of sharks, right? They're going to do everything they can. From Piastri's side, there's a major complication. He's currently locked into a long-term deal with McLaren, and any move would require significant shakeup in the driver market. What makes this rumor so interesting, though, is not just the names involved, it's what it signals, because Red Bull doesn't typically plan for life after Max Verstappen. The fact that they're even prepping a structured fallback option tells you just how seriously they view the possibility of change at the very top of the grid. And at the same time, Verstappen has publicly expressed his frustration in certain aspects of Formula One's future decision, which has only fueled speculation about his long-term commitment to the team, the series, everything, right? Even if nothing concrete suggests an imminent exit. So where does this leave us? Well, right now, this is still firmly a rumor. No negotiations, no official talks, just paddock-level positioning and long-term planning. But in Formula One, where contracts are never as permanent as they look on paper, the fact that Oscar Piastri's name is already being linked to Red Bull's future tells you everything about how highly rated that guy really is, and how seriously teams are already preparing for the next big driver market earthquake, right? The shakeup, if you will. Because in this sport, even when the grid looks stable, the chess pieces are always moving. And this week's history segment takes us back to one of the most important teams in the modern American open wheel racing history, and that's Rahal Hogan Racing. And I'll tell you why they're so important when a lot of people may not even know who I'm talking about, but this team's story is way bigger than just race wins and championships, because Rahal Hogan Racing became the foundation for what would eventually evolve to one of the longest running and most respected organizations in IndyCar history, and that's Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. To really understand the importance of Rahal Hogan Racing, you first have to understand where Bobby Rahal was in his career heading into the early 90s. By that point, Bobby Rahal was already one of the biggest stars in IndyCar racing. He had won the 1986 Indianapolis 500, captured kart championships in 86 and 87, and established himself as one of the smartest and most technically gifted drivers in the sport. But after spending years driving for other owners, Rahal wanted control of his own future. That opportunity came in late 1991 when Rahal partnered with businessman Carl Hogan to purchase the struggling Patrick Racing operation from Pat Patrick. The new organization became Rahal Hogan Racing, and almost immediately the team became a powerhouse. In fact, Rahal Hogan Racing pulled off something incredibly rare in motorsports. They won a championship in their very first season, driving the familiar Miller-sponsored Lola Chevrolet, one of my favorite cars of all time, in case anyone was curious. Bobby Rahal delivered one of the finest seasons of his career in 1992. He won 4 races that year. He won at Phoenix, Detroit, New Hampshire, and Nazareth. He captured his 3rd kart championship in a fierce battle against Michael Andretti. What makes the title even more impressive is that Rahal was the owner-driver at the time. That combination almost never works at the top level of motorsports because trying to run an organization while also competing against the best drivers in the world is unbelievably difficult, yet Bobby Rahal managed to do both successfully. To this day, he remains one of the last owner-drivers to win a major American Open Wheel Championship. I mean, look at today's examples, right? Let's talk about Ed Carpenter for a second. You see what he has to do day in and day out. He tried to run as an owner. Then he went to just the ovals for a while. Now he's just at the 500. I mean, there's a lot going on, right? And the more he's stepped away, the better the team's gotten because he's allowed himself to run the team and lead the team rather than try to be a driver and owner, right? So anyway, moving back over to where we were at. While the team reached the mountaintop immediately at Rahal Hogan, the next few years became far more complicated. In 1993, Rahal Hogan Racing attempted one of the boldest moves imaginable, and that was building their own chassis. The team absorbed the remnants of the old True Sports operation and developed the RH chassis, hoping to compete directly against powerhouse manufacturers like Lola and Penske. On paper, it sounded ambitious and innovative. In reality, it became one of the most infamous engineering failures of the kart era. The car simply wasn't competitive, and the disaster peaked at Indianapolis in 1993 when Bobby Rahal, one of the biggest names in the sport at the time and former Indy 500 winner, failed to qualify for the Indianapolis 500. The moment shocked the entire motorsports world at that time. Think about how insane that sounds today. Bobby Rahal in his own car missing the Indy 500 entirely. Failure forced the team to abandon the RH01 chassis almost immediately and return to Lola equipment later that season. And honestly, that whole period perfectly captures what made Rahal Hogan Racing so fascinating. This was not a conservative team. They took huge risks. Sometimes those risks produced championships. Sometimes they produced complete disasters. But they were never afraid to try something ambitious. Then came another hugely important chapter in 1994 when Rahal Hogan Racing became Honda's first full-time kart partner. That relationship would become one of the most historically significant manufacturer partnerships in IndyCar history. Say that 5 times fast. At this time, though, Honda was brand new to kart, right? They had early results, but they were rough. The engine lacked reliability and the power compared to the dominant Elmore and Cosworth programs. The team struggled badly at Indianapolis once again. Bobby Rahal and teammate Mike Grove actually had to borrow Penske chassis just to make the Indy 500 field. Rahal still managed an incredible 3rd place finish in the race despite the chaos surrounding the program in this borrowed car. That partnership with Honda is massively important historically because Rahal Hogan Racing helped lay the groundwork for Honda eventually becoming one of the dominant manufacturers in American open wheel racing. But through all of this, Carl Hogan remained a hugely influential figure behind the scenes. Hogan was not the flashy public face of the team. Bobby Rahal naturally occupied that role, but Carl Hogan's business leadership and longtime ties through Hogan Transportation were critical to stabilizing and funding the organization during a very turbulent era in kart racing. By 1995, the team had recovered somewhat competitively. Rahal had switched to Mercedes power and put together a strong season with multiple podium finishes, another top 3 championship result. Even though the team didn't win a race that year, they were once again consistently competitive against Penske, Ganassi, the Newman-Haas team, and the other giants over there in the kart series. Then in 1996, everything changed again. Carl Hogan left the partnership, effectively ending the Rahal Hogan Racing era. Rahal continued operating the organization under the Team Rahal banner, while Hogan launched his own independent kart effort. And honestly, the split led to one of the coolest ripple effects in open wheel history because both sides of the breakup continued influencing the sport for years afterwards. Team Rahal eventually added late-night television legend David Letterman as a co-owner, later evolved into Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, and eventually became something that we still see in IndyCar today, right? Meanwhile, Hogan's independent Hogan Racing operation became a launching point for several future stars. The list of drivers that passed through Hogan Racing after the split is honestly incredible. You had Emerson Fittipaldi, who drove for Hogan in 96 before his career-ending Michigan crash. Jan Magnussen replaced Fittipaldi later that year. In 1997, Hogan signed a young Dario Franchitti before Franchitti eventually became one of the greatest IndyCar drivers of his generation. Then came Elio Castroneves in 1999, years before Elio became a four-time Indy 500 winner and one of the most recognizable personalities in IndyCar history. Even drivers like Robbie Gordon and J.J. Leto spent time under the Hogan banner. That's part of what makes the Rahal Hogan legacy so important. The team sat right at the crossroads of multiple IndyCar generations. It connected legends from the 1980s kart boom, future Indy 500 winners, future champions, future team owners, and major manufacturer programs all in one evolving organization. And today you can still see traces of Rahal Hogan Racing everywhere in IndyCar. The Honda partnership still exists through RLL. Bobby Rahal leadership philosophy still shapes the organization. The team still competes at the Indy 500 more than 3 decades later. And the blue and white Hogan branding remains deeply nostalgic for longtime kart fans because it represents one of the most fascinating eras in American open-wheel racing. A time when owner-drivers still existed, teams took massive engineering risks, and kart was packed with innovation, personalities, and absolutely stacked competition. All right, that is going to wrap it up for episode 88. We're already at 88 episodes, it's wild, of Historic Hot Laps. This week honestly felt like just one of those perfect motorsports weekends where every discipline had something major happen. I know we had an off week in Formula One, don't hate me on that. You had SVG continuing to redefine the road course work over there. You had Kasey Kahne's story of capturing his long-awaited World of Outlaws victory after 3 decades of trying. You know, all the other dirt stuff we had going on. Honestly, we're only getting started. The next few weeks are about to become completely insane across motorsports world. The Indy 500 buildup is fully underway. Formula One silly season rumors are already heating up earlier than expected. NASCAR's chase for the Cup playoff, whatever you want to call it, picture is tightening fast. And sprint car racing might honestly be producing the best week 3 products in the country right now. But keep a close eye on Katherine Legge's attempt at the double, because if she pulls this off, it'll become one of the coolest accomplishments of the entire year. As always, thank you guys for listening and supporting us here at Historic Hot Laps. Make sure to follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, the YouTube channel, all the good stuff. Don't forget to follow us on all your social medias at Historic Hot Laps. We got clips, updates, all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff coming up, and more throughout the week. We're going to be at Indy. We're going to post some stuff there too. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with another racing fan, because word of mouth genuinely helps this show grow more than anything else. We'll be back next week. More racing news, race recaps, and another deep dive into motorsports history. Until then, enjoy this racing week. Stay safe. Thanks for tuning in.